Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Does anyone else here feel a strange connection to the desert? This is fairly recent for me. I went on a trip to experience some history, food, and rural culture, and nothing stood out to me more than my time spent in the desert staying with Bedouins. I went on a late-night walk, around 30 minutes out of the camp in the middle of nothing. Must have spent a couple of hours staring up at the sky and feeling a strange sense of purpose. My fears of scorpions climbing up my shorts and molesting me melted away, and I was completely transfixed with the idea that I was on the other side of the world, from my friends and family, yet felt at home in the middle of the desert. Maybe it's just the amount of history that took place in the Middle East, thousands of years of war and mythology that felt so tangible in the air there.
Me 13, sleeping out on a trampoline 'cause it's summer. Often see weird shit in the sky. Grew up in the middle of nowhere in the desert, surrounded by nothing but sagebrush, lava rocks, and coyotes for miles. Friends would visit from the city and were always scared of being out at night. I didn't understand why, 'cause I grew up out there. Now that I've lived in town for many years, I get what was so creepy about it. Anyway, this night it was super dark. There were no clouds and a new moon. The stars were ridiculously beautiful out in the desert. That is why sleeping out there was always so interesting, but it isn't the only reason. The area was known for a thing that the old heads called the lights. I saw them maybe 30% of the time I slept out. This time was different. Usually they were little white lights, just bigger than stars but brighter. They would zoom around the entire sky at insane speeds and crazy lines and angles. No real curves. I was never too scared of them. I always hoped I would see them when I slept out on the trampoline. This night I was on my back looking up at the stars. I had my glasses on so I could see them better, even though I usually fell asleep with them on and messed them up. I saw the lights directly above me. It started to move, but slower than usual. This was a little creepy, but I couldn't explain why. The light moved about as far as my hand if I put it straight up in front of my face. Then it went off or disappeared. I had goosebumps for some reason, but I was mostly excited that the lights did something new. The light appeared again a few seconds later on the western horizon. It seemed lower than it had been. It stayed on for about the same amount of time as before and went out. Then it appeared again in the west, this time about a third of the way closer. It stayed on a little while and shut off just like before. Each time it turned on, it moved in a straight line towards me at that same creepy steady pace, but when the light went out, it must have moved way faster to get to the next spot where it would light up. The light appeared again like 2/3 of the way to me. This time I could see it lighting up the closest house to where I lived, almost 2 miles across the flat desert. The light turned off again, and then appeared directly over my house. It lit up everything so bright it was like the middle of the damn day. I couldn't move because I was scared shitless. I just held as still as I could, and held my breath until it went off. I never saw anything but the light. There was no metal craft or anything that I could see, even when the thing was right above my house. Nothing was there until the light turned on, and nothing was there when the light turned off. While it was directly overhead, the light source was too bright to look at. It was pretty big, like the size of a basketball held in front of my face at arm's length. The thing continued its pattern the rest of the way to the eastern horizon, and I ran back in the house as soon as I couldn't see it anymore. I was scared to get up with the light so close. When I got inside, I ran to my dad and woke him up. I told him what happened, and he could see how scared I was. He told me it was probably just a guy in a plane or something, and to go get my sleeping bag off the trampoline. I did not want to go back out there, but he was pissed that I woke him up, so I did not wait around to be told twice. I went back outside and walked reluctantly to the trampoline. We had a huge yard out in the desert, and it was a longer walk than you might expect to get from the house to the trampoline. I finally got there and got my stuff all gathered up. I was just about to start walking back when I noticed the lights on the northern horizon. The thing was going to come back. I ran back to the house and told my dad that it was back out there and begged him to come see it. He seemed oddly excited considering his attitude before. He put on his slippers and we went outside. We stood in the backyard next to the house. We had missed 2 of the light flashes while I was arguing with my dad to go outside. It lit up right above the house again. My dad and I froze there, and I noticed that in the bright light his skin looked a weird color. The grass still looked pretty normal green, and the house looked the normal color, so before I saw the light I assumed it was a bluish-white light. Now seeing the way it made my dad's and my skin look silvery blue, it made me think it was a special color of light that would reflect brightly off of skin. We watched as it went the rest of the way in a straight line south following the same pattern as before. I looked at my dad and he started walking inside. I followed him in and asked him what he thought we had seen. He said just don't worry about it and try to get some sleep. In my entire life, my dad has never refused to answer a question like that. I asked him about it the next day, and he said it reminded him of something he saw in the desert when he was a kid. He never really told me the full story. I asked him about it again a few days later, and he said he didn't remember anything like that. This is just the first weird thing that happened with the lights in the desert. Maybe I will post another green text about the rest of the story sometime. I'll just say it gets way creepier. And the lights drawing out a giant X-shaped path that crossed right above my house was no coincidence.
All this hubbub about aliens and UFOs has made me green textify my own encounter with what I can only call entities, be me, about 14 in August 8, 2005. Live in a 400-square-foot tin cabin in the middle of 130 acres of rolling desert hills filled with the occasional pasturing cow. It has electricity and plumbing, but barely. My family pays $200 a month to live in the cabin. The owners of the property live in a real house out of sight on the far end of the property. I have an alarm app on my red DS set to wake me up at 3 a.m. that night because I wanted to go outside and goof around unsupervised. Grab a PB and J sandwich in tinfoil, made it before going to bed. Grab Glock BB gun from under my dresser and a bunch of empty soda cans to shoot at. Put it all in my backpack and sneaked out, which despite the cramped space was easy enough, given that my mom slept with a CPAP louder than an airplane taking off. Trek over hills, over a 5-foot deep by 3 feet wide dried-up irrigation ditch me and my brother would play trench warfare in. Once I get sufficiently far away, I set up my tin cans and ready my BB gun, only to realize I brought the gun and the BBs, but not the magazine slide that went into the base of the handle to actually load them. Damn, that sucks. .jpg. Collect my tin cans, jumping on them to squash them to save space. Eat my sad sandwich in silence in the most sad way possible. On my way back to the cabin, I stumbled upon them. This single moment has been burned into my brain forever. Just thinking about them makes me sweaty and nauseous. On the close side of the irrigation ditch was a dead cow, which wasn't too uncommon to see. My brother showed me a cow skeleton earlier that year. This cow was rotting and absolutely was not there on my way out, but here it was in front of me. Floating above the cow were 2 things, each like a lung turned inside out, made out of leather and covered in sequins. Their multi-tiered bodies shriveled and expanded like a heartbeat, making a dry crinkling noise with every contraction. They slightly rotated in place, not taking notice of me, if they were even capable of doing so. I didn't have the sense to be stricken still by fear. After seeing these things, I immediately full-on sprinted past them and back home. Immediately vomit on the porch, hide in the living room. Have nightmares about it for the next couple years. I have no idea what I saw, but I wish I hadn't.
My friends and I went camping in the Mojave last January where we encountered some sort of cryptid. We don't know what it is, but would like your help. Be us. Me and 5 friends are all commandos, decide to go for yet another camping shooting trip in the southern Mojave. Arrive in the afternoon of day 1, set up camp in the V of a hillside. About 100 yards north of us is the innermost part of the berm, and it comes out roughly where we set camp up, being 200 yards at the widest. To our south and east is nothing but open flat desert. North and northwest is our mountain in the middle of nowhere. Reject training shoot at trash.png. Just us having a good time while waiting for a 6th friend to show up. It begins to get dark. We build our fire, continue to talk while all of us are in full kit and strapped. While we wait, the three of us, Matt, Nate, and I, decide to practice our night patrols. Two of us strap our shitty Gen 1 night vision goggles to our helmets and we set off. We march over the berm, all three of us Condition 1. Matt and I have ARs, mine with a HL light, Matt with a light, and Nate has a 1918 SML EMK4, over-the-top lads.png. As we crest the hill, we immediately feel like we're being watched, hairs all standing up and I'm on edge. We keep walking around and I see a reflective glint like eyes up on the steeper part of the mountain through my night vision goggles. Different part away from camp. Bring my gun up and blast the area with the brightness of 1,000 suns. There's nothing there, not even a glint of reflection. I get the other guy's attention. Matt confirms the glint through night vision goggles, but sees nothing with actual light. Because we're not wusses, we hike up there to check it out. As we hike up, this feeling of dread increases. It's almost smothering me when we are on top of the area. There's nothing here. Absolutely nothing. And nothing that could reflect light, infrared, or otherwise. We laugh about seeing things to diffuse the tension and hike back down. At the bottom, we still feel like we're being watched and look back up the hill. The reflective eyes are still there. We nope out of there and hike back to our camp and reunite with the rest of the bois. Cant off of Three Sisters. We hike back to our camp and reunite with the rest of the boys. I begin making dinner. Cook up 4 delicious steaks that we all share. We begin shooting the shit and light up a couple cigars, we being passing the cigars around as we stay up waiting for our 6th friend to show up. We begin telling our personal encounter stories of various /X/ things, ghosts and skinwalker stories we've heard from friends. It's around midnight now. As we are talking, Nate stops and says, "Hey, shut up, you hear that?" We mock him. "No, seriously, do you hear that?" We all stop and hear this growling, guttural, raspy scream. We begin to shit bricks and rack all our guns. What the fuck? What the fuck? Hear this thing 4 times. Both sounds very distant and like it's approaching the ridge we had hiked over earlier. We all begin scanning our areas on high alert. After what felt like an hour but was probably only 5 minutes, all the screams stop. We stay on edge for a long time, but eventually all sleep in our friend's truck after our buddy arrives 2 hours later. We heard it's rather faint, so use headphones. What do you think we encountered? One of my friends thinks it's a skinwalker. We were at the Red X for our campsite. When we went on patrol, it was over the ridge to the north and saw eyes approximately at the blue X. The sound sounded like they came from the north, but it was hard to tell the direction. I don't think it was a small rodent, because we shined a high lumen light on the spot after seeing the eye glint and nothing was there. Immediately turn off the light and the glint returns. And when we got up to the spot, nothing was there. Blue X should be on the hillside to the left, but other than that, accurate. Three Sisters is one of our favorite camping and shooting sites in the winter, or at least was. Although this isn't the first weird thing to happen there. One time, Matt went there with a couple of our friends from North California for a night shoot. They passed an abandoned old church out on the dirt roads at night. We've never seen that church since.
I was kind of thinking this was coyotes, but it definitely isn't. It's not dog-like at all. Deserts seem really lonely. Any more interesting stories of note?
On a different trip, Matt and I were driving through the Mojave in the middle of the night, going to a friend's bachelor party that was taking place on a friend's property way in North Nevada, like the Carson City area. It's probably 1 a.m. and we're driving through Kramer Junction. We're bored and begin talking ghost stories and cryptid stories we've heard or encountered. He grew up and still lives in a haunted house. Until recently, I hadn't had much happen to me, but I've heard a lot of things. At one point, he even talks about how he once saw a skinwalker out on a trail, and he and his dog passed it peacefully as he eyed it. Whatever. I'm driving just fine. It's a very dark night, no moon if I remember correctly. C-shape keeping pace with care off in distance. I wouldn't worry about it. Ask Matt if he sees this shit. He doesn't at first, but then he does. Every now and then catch glimpses of movement. Doesn't help our nerves that we're the only ones on the road, and all our guns are buried under camping gear. After like 45 minutes, we finally stopped seeing it. We need gas, so I pull into this chevron at Koso Junction. What's weird about this place is that it seems unnaturally dark around the chevron, while the lights of the chevron are bright and beckoning. We pull into the place and we immediately feel like we're being watched and a smothering feeling of dread. It's so strong you can feel it compressing your chest. I've only felt like that one other time before. It's completely empty and we both really need to piss. I go over to a pole near the building and piss there out of view of cameras. Matt just runs off into the dark. As soon as he leaves the lights, it's like he jumped into a black hole. I've never seen darkness so suppressive. I then fill up the car, freaking out, singing worship songs and fingering my K-bar. The entire time I swear I can feel a presence in the brush to our north, and it's huge. After an eternity, my tank is full. I get into my car and lock the door. Oh, sweet Jesus, I feel safer, but not by much. I then move the car around and point it east where Matt ran off to. Turn the bright on and can't see shit past the lights of the chevron. It was the weirdest thing. Again, after an eternity, Matt finally comes out of the darkness and gets to the car. Before I let him in, ask him to verify himself by saying something only we would know. As we pull out and finally get back on the highway, the feeling of oppressive dread finally goes away. A year later, I did some research. Koso Junction did at one point have an Indian massacre, and when I talked to Matt about it, he agrees it felt like we were on the verge of a different dimension or something, because time seemed to freeze there. I have been back there somewhat recently, also at night at a similar time with Matt and one of our other friends on the way to a different trip. None of the same vibes, and I could easily see several hundred feet beyond the gas station lights.
An obnoxious little man from Newark moved out to Tombstone, Arizona. Surrounded by traces of the Old West, he began to fancy himself a gunslinger. He bought a 6-gun and drove out to the desert to teach himself how to shoot. Day after day, he returned to the desert to practice. His favorite targets were giant saguaro cacti. He imagined that they were desperados, and he was John Wayne. There was one saguaro in particular he liked to use for target practice. It was massive, 15 feet high and 4 feet around at the base, with 2 huge arms that made the cactus look like it was surrendering to the Newark cowboy. After a couple of months of taking pot shots at this cactus, it was chewed up by bullet holes, but the marksman never gave a thought to the damage he was inflicting on the cactus. One day, as usual, he drove out to the desert to indulge in his favorite fantasy of saving the life of Cameron Diaz from a 15-foot-tall outlaw. He blasted away at his saguaro. When he stopped to reload, it seemed to him that the saguaro swayed slightly. Curious, he walked over and saw that the base of the cactus was soft and spongy, almost rotted through. It wouldn't take much to make this giant fall over. As he contemplated the loss of his favorite adversary, a new gunslinger appeared in the desert. This one came from East St. Louis, and he too saw himself as a hero of the Old West. But while the Newark cowboy favored a 6-gun, this character had bought a shotgun. He saw the giant saguaro cactus, but not the small man who was standing behind it. He took careful aim, pulled the trigger, and caught the saguaro in the middle. It wobbled for a moment, then lurched backward. The man with the shotgun heard a high-pitched no as the saguaro fell. When he ran over, he found the gunslinger from Newark crushed beneath the giant cactus.
During the winter months of 2007, my family was living in Doha, Qatar. My father was working in the gas field while I was attending high school at the private American school. My dad and I would always head out into the sand dunes on the weekend to go ripping around on our quad bikes. A chemical processing plant was built right next to these sand dunes and could very clearly be seen no matter where you were out in that area. It was about 8 p.m. Saturday night, and my dad and I were about to call it a day and load the quads back onto the truck and head home for the evening when we stopped on top of the sand dune to have a look at the stars. And that's when we saw it. A very, very bright, pure white light had appeared out of nowhere directly above us. We assumed it had something to do with the military, because Qatar houses one of the largest US military bases in the region. Then it started moving very slowly towards the chemical plant, overshooting it and stopping just on the ocean side of the plant. It stood still for a few moments, just kind of hovering there silently. Then it began to head back over the plant towards where it had originally appeared, but now it was following an oval path in the sky. By the time it had completed its complete oval back over to the chemical plant, it had dropped from what we figured about 10,000 feet to 5,000 feet. We could now look at the sides of it as it moved, but all we could see was bright white light. Then came a rumble, a very distant rumble. We turned and looked inland. Towards the middle of the desert and in the sky came 2 American F-16. I'm assuming that's what the Americans are using in the Middle East. I'm not /K/ so I don't know. After burning, roaring across the dark desert sky towards this bright white light, hovering over the chemical plant. The F-16s did 2 loops around this flying object. Then as quickly as they appeared, they left, heading back towards the center of Qatar towards the military base. On the other side of the sand dune we were sitting on top of, while we watched this object, the local construction companies were mining out the sand to use as base filler for construction. The area that remained was a giant mud flat, about 1 mile across and 5 miles long. This bright white light had followed its semi-oval path and was sitting above us now. Then it began to descend. As it got closer and closer to the ground, the light changed color from pure white to a green. As the object passed right in front of us, we got a clear look at it. The object we were looking at was a tubular steel container, just long and large enough to fit a person inside, but no bigger than that, and attached to it was a giant white parachute. There were green lights that were shining directly into the parachute and towards the ground. The object landed flat in the mud flat about 300 meters away from us. The parachute covered the capsule and the lights went out. During this whole event, not a sound was made. No buzzing, no bang when it hit the ground, nothing. My dad and I decided before we went to take a look we were going to go back to the truck, get our cameras and phone, then call the police once we figured out what the object was. This took about 3 minutes to do. Then we were back on top of the sand dune about to head into the mud flat when we stopped. 2 plain white Toyota Land Cruisers were ripping out of the mud flat towards the highway. We didn't see them show up. We didn't see them sitting there. They must have been sitting in the mud flats with their lights off waiting. After they were outside, we descended into the mud flat to have a look at the crash site. There was nothing there, only tire tracks. There was no disturbance on the ground, no crater, no drag marks, nothing. Whatever it was had hit the ground soft enough to leave no trace. After that, we packed up the quads and went back to town. And that's my close-up and personal story of seeing an unidentified flying object in the middle of the Arabian desert.
So my story's going to deviate from the theme ever so slightly. I don't currently have a career, you see, but I'm working up to it. As of right now, I am a post-college intern doing a practical historical conservation internship with the Israel Antiquities Authority and based out of Akko in the Western Galilee. That being said, I intend to start my career in museum curation once I get back to the U.S. I'm in the closing days of this internship right now, and the story I'm about to tell happened earlier in the program. Just after our Passover break, we were taken to the ancient mountain fortress of Masada to get training on fresco and mosaics conservation. While our workdays, which went from 7 in the morning to 4:30 in the afternoon, required us to climb to the top of the mountain, we spent each night down at the base of the Roman ramp entrance. There are 2 routes to the top of the mountain. Down there is a little campsite for tour groups to stay at so they could make the traditional climb to the mountaintop to watch the sunrise. For our week-long stay, we got to sleep in the driver's cabin, basically, a small building where the bus drivers of these tour groups got to sleep. You can see it in the picture I included. There was no internet, no towns or stores within accessible distance. The town of Arad was nearish, but we were basically dropped off by our instructors and given no way of leaving Masada until the week ended, and our van driver came back for us. And very few people around save for the odd campsite manager or tour group, who stay in another part of the campground. At night, in the middle of the desert, it would get cold, pitch black and damn near silent. With no internet and only 10 TV channels, some showing admittedly decent movies, I'll admit. There was very little to do but sleep or hang out outside under the stars or read. It was refreshing at first, but got kind of boring as time wore on. The technophile in me was desperate for something. I should clarify, I have no problem being cut off from technology if I'm given any amount of warning. But we weren't told that we would be. C'est la vie. One night after one of our group dinners, there were 6 of us. I was helping to clear the plates off the picnic table we ate on because our little house had no sitting room. The site employees had been kind enough to turn the lights on at the campground dining area for us, but that just made everything outside of that little bubble even darker. I was the last person to gather stuff off the table and was on my way back towards the house when I spotted a figure just beyond the light's reach heading up towards the ramp. At first glance, I thought it was one of the 3 campsite managers. That is, until I spotted all 3 of them hanging out playing cards under the lamplight by the campsite garage. So I followed after the person. It was clearly a human, figuring it was one of the kids from up at the campsite or their chaperones going the wrong way. I called out to them. They didn't answer, and I could barely make them out. I jogged a bit to catch up as they were getting near the border that separated the camp from the actual historic site, and called again. Still no answer. Maybe they didn't speak English, I figured. I followed them for maybe 100 yards down the trail that led up to the Roman ramp. My peers were all inside doing dishes, and there I was, following some lost tourist with an armful of dirty plates. I called out in Hebrew and even said the one phrase of greeting I know in Arabic and still got no answer. I could kind of see them at this point, and it looked like they were wearing a dress or a robe or something. I figured it was a dress because there aren't any historical actors at Masada who dress up like ancient Hebrews or anything. Finally, we got to this big hill that sat between the campsite and the Roman ramp trail. There was a staircase leading up it, but I hadn't explored up there yet. The figure turned around the bend beyond where I could see them, and I followed, but by the time I got around the edge of the hill, they were gone. At the time, I told myself that it was some camper or something, and I just lost them in the darkness. I did see people heading back up towards the campsite, but none wearing dresses. It's not a great idea to wear loose-fitting clothing in a scorpion-inhabited desert. I guess they were taking a night hike or some such. 2 days later, I found out what was at the top of that hill, though. It's a little tomb, built in 1969 for the Hebrew defenders of Masada to honor their heroic last stand against the Roman legions in 73 AD, and to house the hundreds of bones and human remains that archaeologists and conservationists have found up on the mountain over the years. They say Masada is among the most haunted sites in all of Israel, maybe all of the Middle East. I certainly believe it now. Pictured the tomb of the defenders of Masada.
There's something near Lake Las Vegas, Bimi Anon. 12-ish at night. Friends and chick he was hooking up with wanted to sneak into the lake and swim in dirty-ass water. Hypochondriac Anon says, you know, but then say, I'll just sit by the dock and just chill on my phone. We sneak in and friends are swimming around and sneaking onto slides for about 20 minutes while I chill on the dock. Pic related to location. I was sitting alone on my phone, then something in my gut says, Anon, turn around now. A coyote is one thing, but this was not. It was hairless and looked like a reverse-limbed dog man or something. I really can't describe it. Red eyes reflecting off of whatever light there was. Anon feels true fear for the first time, dizzy with tunnel vision and nauseated. Just remember standing up and backing to near the water in case this thing charged me. It just looked at me. Hairless, dark, dog-like figure that did not act like a dog. I can't explain it, but it just didn't look possible how it was walking. It felt like my heart stopped working and skipped beats. It slowly backs and prances away on its hairless, reversed limbs. I say prance because that's the closest thing I can describe. Frozen, it just goes away into some huge bushes and the smell disappears. I just sat there for another 15 minutes on the edge of the dock near the water, completely frozen and flushed. Friends come back. Ask me if I'm okay. I say yes and change the subject. I'm tearing up writing this. IDK what I saw, but it wasn't a coyote, mountain lion, or a lost dog. Those things don't bring the smell of what I can describe as painful rot. I will never go back there. I now have a fear of off-roading and going out in the desert and exploring because of this experience. Vegas is cursed, I swear.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.